This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Rabbi says, so this is our annual Purim Katan Tish. So you say, how could it be an annual Purim Katan Tish? Purim Katan could only be when there's a leap year. But since this is the first year we're doing it, so far it's annual. That's the pshat. So I want to talk about the mitzvahs hayoim of Purim Katan. We started off today, we pointed out that the Talmidei Baal Shem don't have a Suda on Purim Katan. You look in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Ein Bein, Adar Rishon v'Adar Sheni, Ela Mikra Megillah, and Matanos Avyonim. Now, Matanos Avyonim always goes together with Mikra Megillah, because the Gemara says, as far as Masechta Megillah, Einei Ho'aniyim are Nesuos Mikra Megillah. Everybody knows that you give out the tzedakah money at the Mikra Megillah. So Mikra Megillah and Matanos Avyonim usually go hand in hand. The shaila is there a mitzvah? What about Shalach Manos? We know there's no Matanos Avyonim Purim Katan. We know there's no Suda. But what about Mishloach Manos? Is there an Inyan of Mishloach Manos on? Right. In other words, the Mishnah says Ein Bein Purim Adar Rishon Adar Sheni Ela Mikra Megillah Matanos Avyonim. What about Mishloach Manos? You see, the Ksav Sofer writes in Parashat Tzatzaveh, the reason why there's a shaila about Suda, right? Because the Ramah brings down a deya in Tafrei Sadi Zayin that Yeshoimim, that you should have your Mechuyev to have a Suda on Purim Katan. Why? Because the Mishnah says the only thing you don't do is Mikra Megillah and Matanos Avyonim. The Mishnah doesn't say Suda, so maybe you should have a Suda. And then the Ramah says, no, we're not Mechuyev to, but you're Marbek Tzas. But what about Mishloach Manos? So Ksav Sofer quotes the Ran. The Ran is on Gimel Amud Beis, B'dafei Harif, and the Ran is bothered. Is there Shalach Manos on Purim Katan? So the Ran says a chidush that Shalach Manos is just like Matanos Avyonim, and if there's no mitzvah of Matanos Avyonim on Purim Katan, then there's no mitzvah of Mishloach Manos on Purim Katan. That's the conclusion of the Ran. However, the Ksav Sofer says Lulei Divrei Haran. I would say a different svara, perhaps, why there's no Shalach Manos, which perhaps would come out then that you should give Shalach Manos. Listen to the Ksav Sofer. Ksav Sofer says, not the pshat that Mishloach Manos is like Matanos Avyonim. Why is Mishloach Manos like Matanos Avyonim? Matanos Avyonim is dependent on Megillah. He says a different svara. We all know, and Ksav Sofer writes about this in a tshuva, what's the reason for Shalach Manos? Stam, you should know, the reason for Shalach Manos, there are two deyas in the Achronim. The Trumas Hadeshin writes the reason for Shalach Manos is so that people have food for their Suda. People should have food for the Suda. And the Manos Halevi says the reason for Shalach Manos is Haman said, Yeshnai Am Echad Mefuzar Mefayrad. They're a fragmented people. They have cliques. They don't invite people to their Kedushim. They don't invite people to their Simchas. They're cliquey. And then Haman came. So how do we show Achdus? We show Achdus with Shalach Manos. That's why this time of the year, it's a tough time of the year because the Satan wants to show Haman's right. So we're miskaber. This is the time of the year that we could be miskaber and we could be koivesh, the yetzer of senas chinam, ayidei shachmanas. So the Ksav Sofer says sort of a third approach. He says, what's the reason for Mishloach Manos? He says the reason for Mishloach Manos is while a person's eating a Suda, so part of a Suda is you eat for yourself, but you don't want to be a glutton and selfish, so you send to others, right? Like, how can you just be eating yourself and not send to other people? The reason for Shalach Manos is part of Suda is sending part of the Suda to others. That's the reason for Mishloach Manos. So says the Ksav Sofer, an interesting thing. So it comes out, the Ramah says you're not mechuyev to have a Suda on Purim Katan. Elamai, the Ramah says, Umihu, noyagin laharbes ktsas. To whatever level you're noyeg to be marbe in the Suda, to that level you should be noyeg Shalach Manos. Says the Ksav Sofer, Shalach Manos is not totally a Matanos Avyonim. In that case, you would be completely pater. Shalach Manos is dependent on Suda. So if, let's say, you get together, you drink wine, you have Viennese crunch, so you take one. So you say Shalach Manos to whatever you're eating, have some wine. You give Shalach Manos. So Ksav Sofer comes out that taka, if you're not going to have a Suda, don't give Shalach Manos. If you're going to have a Suda, then you should give Shalach Manos. That's Pshat in the Ramah, Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. Pshat is, if you're a good-hearted person, and you're having the Suda, he says, Lo yechos hachev l'shnei Russian. You can't have a Suda and not give Shalach Manas. If you have the Suda, you give Shalach Manas. If you don't give Shalach Manas, you don't have a Suda. Toiv lev, if you're a generous person, mishtet tamid. He says, V'hainu d'Mesayim, v'toiv lev she'en li boiro l'hanas achem. If you're not stingy, mishtet tamid, then you're mekabel upon yourself the chumrah of the poskim, also to give Shalach Manas. Okay, that's the first little zach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.